The stagecoach had left without her. Eliza Monroe stood in the dusty street of Dustwater, her traveling case at her feet, staring at the empty spot where the coach should have been waiting. The October wind cut through her thin traveling cloak like a knife made of ice. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders, though it did little good. At nearly 6 feet tall, Eliza had never found a cloak that properly covered her frame. Just another reminder of all the ways she did not fit into this world. The letter from Mr. Tom Harland, owner of the Double Bar Ranch, had been perfectly clear. The monthly supply run left on the 15th of every month, and she could secure passage to the ranch where she had been hired as a seamstress. It was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from everything she had left behind in Kansas. But the storm that had trapped her in Dodge City for 2 whole days had cost her dearly. Now, according to the station master, who barely looked up from his ledger, the coach had departed yesterday morning. The next one would not come for another month. The old man spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon and scratched his beard. Boss Harlan figured you was not coming after that storm blew through. He does not wait for nobody. Storm or no storm. Eliza felt her heart sink into her stomach. 1 month. She had exactly $12 to her name. Not nearly enough to survive 4 weeks in a strange town where she knew no one. Is there another way to reach the Double Bar? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Not unless you got your own horse and know the trail. The station master finally looked at her then, his watery eyes traveling up her unusual height with that familiar mix of surprise and disapproval she had known all her life. It is 40 miles through rough country, though I reckon a woman traveling alone would not make it past Coyote Ridge. Eliza bit back her response. She had traveled alone all the way from Kansas, had she not? She had survived things this old man could never imagine. But arguing with narrow-minded men had never gotten her anywhere. Instead, she picked up her case and turned toward the town's main street. Dustwater was smaller than she had expected, just a collection of weather-beaten buildings huddled against the endless prairie. She counted them as she walked. A mercantile with a faded sign, a saloon with swinging doors, a church with a crooked steeple that leaned slightly to the left, and what appeared to be a boarding house with lace curtains in the windows. At least she could find lodging for the night while she figured out her next move. The boarding house proprietor was a pinched-faced woman named Mrs. Caldwell. She wore her gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her skin, and her thin lips pressed together in permanent disapproval. She took one look at Eliza and shook her head before Eliza could even speak. "I do not rent rooms to unaccompanied women," Mrs. Caldwell said. Her eyes traveled up and down Eliza's tall frame, lingering on her practical traveling dress instead of the frills and bustles that proper ladies wore. "We run a respectable establishment here." "I am a seamstress," Eliza said, keeping her voice calm and polite despite the frustration building in her chest. "I have employment waiting at the Double Bar Ranch. I simply need a place to stay until the next supply run." "Rules are rules," Mrs. Caldwell interrupted her with a wave of her bony hand. "Try the saloon. Sometimes Big Pete lets folks sleep in his storeroom." The door closed in Eliza's face before she could say another word. She stood on the porch for a long moment, taking a deep breath of the cold October air. This was not the first time she had been turned away because of how she looked or who she was. It would not be the last. She had learned long ago that feeling sorry for herself accomplished nothing. The saloon was no better. Big Pete, who ironically stood a full head shorter than Eliza, laughed out loud at her request. His belly shook beneath his stained apron, and the men at the bar turned to stare at her like she was some kind of circus attraction. "Storeroom is full of grain sacks," Big Pete said, still chuckling. "And even if it was not, I do not run no charity house for wayward women." Wayward, as if seeking honest work made her fallen. As if being tall and traveling alone meant she had loose morals. Eliza left without another word. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. The sun was sinking now, painting the sky the color of blood and rust. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could see her breath forming little clouds in the air. She had spent nights outdoors before during her journey west, but never in weather this cold. Her thin cloak would be useless against a prairie night in late October. She might actually freeze to death. For a moment, just a moment, Eliza allowed herself to feel the weight of her situation. Stranded in a town full of strangers who wanted nothing to do with her, no money for a hotel, even if one would accept her. No horse, no friends, no family. She had left Kansas to escape Clayton Harper and his cruel hands. She had left to find a new life, a place where she could be herself without apology. And now she might die alone on a dusty street in the middle of nowhere, and no one would even care. But then she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Eliza Monroe had not survived 28 years of being too tall, too plain, and too stubborn to give up now. She made her way to the small eatery attached to the general store, hoping at least for a hot meal while she considered her options. Maybe she could find a barn to sleep in. Maybe she could offer to work in exchange for shelter. Maybe something would turn up. It had to. The warmth from the pot-bellied stove hit her as soon as she pushed open the door, and she had to resist the urge to simply stand there and soak it in. The heat wrapped around her like a blanket, thawing her frozen fingers and cheeks. The eatery was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few townfolk finishing their supper at scattered tables, and one man sitting alone in the corner. Eliza noticed him immediately, though she could not have said why. He was older than her, perhaps in his 40s, with silver threading through dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes marked him as a working man: sturdy boots, worn trousers, a jacket that had seen better days. But there was something in the way he held himself, a careful stillness that made her think he had seen more of life than most. His eyes were the color of winter clouds, gray and distant and somehow sad. Eliza looked away quickly and took a table near the stove. She ordered stew and coffee, counting out her coins carefully. When the food arrived, she ate slowly, partly to savor the warmth seeping into her bones, and partly because she had nowhere else to go when the meal ended. The stew was simple but good, chunks of beef and potatoes and thick brown gravy. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way she liked it. For these few minutes at least, she could pretend everything was fine. But all too soon, the proprietor's daughter appeared beside her table. The girl was young, maybe 16, with red hands from washing dishes and nervous eyes that would not quite meet Eliza's. "Miss?" The girl twisted her apron in her fingers. "Pa says we are closing soon. He said to tell you that you cannot stay here all night." Of course he did. Eliza reached for her purse, her mind racing through desperate options. The church would be locked. A barn would be trespassing. She would likely freeze. "Where will you go?" The voice was low and rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. Eliza looked up. The man from the corner table had risen and now stood a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see his face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Those gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "I do not know," Eliza admitted. There seemed no point in pretending otherwise. Her situation was obvious enough. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if he had made some decision. "You are the seamstress meant for the double bar," he said. It was not a question. "I was." Eliza managed a small, bitter smile. "It seems I'm a day too late. Tom Harlan does not wait for nobody. Storm or no storm, so I have been told." The man was quiet for a moment, and Eliza could see him weighing something behind those clouded eyes. Finally, he spoke again. "It is getting cold out there. Too cold to be wandering the streets." "I will manage," Eliza said. She had always managed before. A ghost of a smile crossed the stranger's face. It softened his features somehow, made him look less like a man carved from stone. "I expect you would," he said, "but there is no need." He turned toward the door, pulling on a worn hat. Then he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "You coming?" Eliza should have been afraid. A strange man in a strange town, offering to take her somewhere unknown. Every instinct her mother had drilled into her said to refuse. But something in his manner made her trust him. The way he kept his distance. The kindness in his voice that asked for nothing in return. Or perhaps she simply had no other choice. She gathered her traveling case and followed him out into the cold. The man led her through the darkening streets of Dustwater without speaking. He walked with a slight limp, Eliza noticed, favoring his right leg. But his pace was steady, and he seemed to know exactly where he was going. The town gave way to open prairie as they walked. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The wind had died down some, but the cold was deepening by the minute. Finally, a small cabin came into view. It sat at the edge of Dustwater, close enough to town but set apart. Like its owner, Eliza thought, part of the community but somehow separate from it. Inside, the cabin was warm and clean, though sparse. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. Eliza took in the details as the man lit a lamp. A quilt folded neatly on a chair. Simple curtains at the windows. A rocking chair in the corner that looked like it had not been used in years. Everything was tidy and cared for, but there were empty spaces too, spots on the walls where pictures had once hung. A second chair at the small table, pushed in tight like it was waiting for someone who would never return. This had been a family home once. The man added more wood to the fire, then straightened and turned to face her. In the lamplight, Eliza could see him more clearly now. He was handsome in a weathered way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. But there was a heaviness about him, a weariness that went deeper than tired muscles. "I am Isaiah Dune," he said. His voice was still low and rough, like he did not use it often. "You can stay tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out the rest." Eliza Monroe. She set down her traveling case and met his eyes. "Thank you, I do not know how to repay your kindness." Isaiah shrugged, looking almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need for that." He walked to a long bench against the wall, padded with a buffalo hide and covered with thick wool blankets. He pulled back the top blanket, revealing clean bedding beneath. "You can sleep here," he said. "It is not fancy, but it is warm. I will take the floor by the fire." Eliza started to protest. She could not take his bed while he slept on the hard floor. But Isaiah held up a hand to stop her. "I have slept in worse places," he said. There was something final in his tone, a man used to ending conversations. He crossed to a small kitchen area and set a kettle on the stove. "You hungry? I got some biscuits left from supper." Eliza realized she was still hungry despite the stew. She nodded gratefully. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence while the kettle heated. Isaiah brought out cold biscuits and a small jar of honey, and Eliza ate while he poured them both cups of strong tea. "How did you know," Eliza asked finally, "that I was the seamstress for the double bar?" Isaiah wrapped his hands around his cup, staring into the amber liquid. "Dustwater is a small town. Word travels fast. Everyone knew Tom Harlan had hired someone from back east. A woman seamstress who was supposed to arrive on the 15th. He glanced at her briefly. "And you do not exactly blend in." Eliza almost smiled at that. "No, I suppose I do not." "Being tall is not a bad thing," Isaiah said. It was the most personal thing he had said to her. "Just different." "Different is not always welcome," Eliza replied. "Not in my experience." Isaiah nodded slowly. He seemed to understand that without needing explanation. "I reckon that is true enough." They finished their tea in silence. Then Isaiah rose and gathered some blankets for himself, spreading them near the fire. He moved efficiently, without fuss. "You should rest," he said. "Morning comes early out here." Eliza settled onto the bench, pulling the heavy blankets over her. The buffalo hide was soft beneath her, and the warmth from the fire reached her even here. It was the most comfortable she had been in weeks. "Mr. Dune," she said into the darkness. "Just Isaiah." "Isaiah," she paused. "Why did you help me?" For a long moment, he did not answer. Eliza thought perhaps he had already fallen asleep. But then his voice came, quiet and rough, because someone should have. It was not much of an answer, but somehow it was enough. Eliza closed her eyes and listened to the crack and pop of the fire. She thought about the long road that had brought her here. The years of feeling too tall, too awkward, too different. The man she had left behind in Kansas who had tried to make her feel small. The dream of a fresh start that had led her west. She was stranded now, lost. But for the first time since leaving home, she did not feel entirely alone. Sleep came easier than she expected. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying. For a moment she lay still, confused by the unfamiliar ceiling and the warm cocoon of blankets around her. Then memory returned. The missed stagecoach, the cold streets of Dustwater. Isaiah Dune pulling back the blanket and offering her a place to sleep. She sat up quickly and swung her feet to the floor. The bench had been surprisingly comfortable, and she had slept deeper than she had in months. Through the small window, she could see the sky turning pink and gold with the coming dawn. Isaiah was already up, standing at the stove with his back to her. He moved with quiet purpose, like a man used to being alone. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee is ready if you want it." "Thank you." Eliza rose and smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could. She would need to find a way to wash her clothes soon, along with everything else she needed to figure out. She poured herself a cup of coffee and wrapped her hands around it. The heat sank deep into her bones, chasing away the last of the night's chill. They ate breakfast together at the small table, bacon, biscuits, and a small jar of preserves that tasted like summer peaches. Isaiah ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if every movement was measured and considered. He did not seem uncomfortable with the silence between them, and Eliza found she was not either. When they finished, Eliza gathered the dishes before Isaiah could move. "I will wash these," she said. "It is the least I can do." He nodded and stepped aside without argument. As she worked at the basin, Eliza noticed more details about the cabin. Everything was clean and cared for, but the empty spaces were more obvious in the daylight. The spots on the walls where pictures had once hung were slightly less faded than the surrounding wood. The rocking chair in the corner had a thin layer of dust that spoke of long disuse. A small shelf held a worn Bible and a music box that looked like it had not been opened in years. This was a man surrounded by ghosts. "About the double bar," Isaiah said after a while. He stood by the window, looking out at the prairie. "I could take you part way. I got an old mule. Stubborn thing, but steady. It would still be a long ride, though." Eliza dried the last dish and set it aside. "I will not trouble you further. You have already done so much. Perhaps someone in town will help." Isaiah turned to look at her. His gray eyes held something like pity, but also respect. "Nobody will," he said quietly. "Not a woman alone." Eliza did not argue. She already knew he was right. "I should go into town," she said instead. "See if there is any work to be had. If I am going to be stuck here for a month, I need to earn my keep somehow." Isaiah nodded. "The church," he said. "Mrs. Murphy might have need of a seamstress. She does most of the mending for folks around here, but her hands are not what they used to be." "Thank you." Eliza gathered her cloak and prepared to face the cold morning. "For everything," Isaiah just nodded again, that same uncomfortable shrug at any mention of gratitude. "I will be here," he said, "when you come back." It was not an invitation exactly, more like a simple statement of fact, but Eliza understood what he meant. She had a place to return to. She was not entirely alone in this strange town. She stepped out into the crisp morning air and started the walk back to Dustwater. The town looked different in daylight, less hostile somehow, though the stares she received as she walked down the main street were no warmer than before. People paused in their conversations to watch her pass. A tall woman in a traveling dress, clearly not from around here. Eliza kept her chin up and her shoulders back. She had survived worse than curious stares. The church was easy to find, with its crooked steeple pointing toward heaven at an angle. The parsonage sat beside it, a modest white house with a neat garden gone dormant for winter. Eliza knocked on the door and waited. The woman who answered was frail and pale, with silver hair and gentle eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Her hands, Eliza noticed, were swollen at the knuckles. Arthritis, most likely. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked. Eliza introduced herself and explained her situation. Mrs. Murphy, for that was who she was, listened with growing interest. "A seamstress?" Mrs. Murphy's face lit up. Come in, come in. Let me show you something." She led Eliza into a small sitting room where piles of mending covered every surface. Torn shirts, ripped hems, buttons needing reattachment. More work than one woman could handle in a year. "I used to do all this myself," Mrs. Murphy said, holding up her swollen hands. "But these old fingers do not cooperate like they used to. I have been praying for help." Eliza examined some of the work. Simple repairs, well within her skill. "I can help you," she said, "if you will have me." "Oh, what a blessing." Mrs. Murphy clasped her hands together. "When can you start?" "Today, if you like." And just like that, Eliza had work. The pay was modest but fair, enough to cover basic needs and save a little for the journey ahead. Eliza worked through the afternoon, her hands steady, her mind calmer than it had been in days. When Mrs. Murphy learned where Eliza was staying, her expression changed. The warmth in her eyes cooled slightly, replaced by something like concern. "Isaiah Dune," Mrs. Murphy said softly, setting down her teacup. "You must be careful, dear." "Why?" Liza looked up from her stitching. Mrs. Murphy hesitated, her old face troubled. She lowered her voice, though there was no one else to hear. There was an accident, 3 years ago now. A wagon went over near Devil's Canyon. A family died. She paused, and Eliza felt a tightening in her chest. Isaiah blamed himself, Mrs. Murphy continued. He has not been the same since. Keeps to himself mostly. Some folks say he is dangerous. Others just say he is broken. Eliza thought about the cabin with its empty spaces, the rocking chair gathering dust, the music box that had not been opened in years. That does not make him a bad man, she said quietly. Mrs. Murphy studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. No, she agreed, just a broken one. That evening, Eliza returned to the cabin as the sun painted the prairie in shades of orange and gold. She found Isaiah behind the house, splitting wood with steady, powerful swings of his axe. Each strike sent pieces of timber flying, and despite the cold, he had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. She watched him for a moment without announcing herself. There was something almost meditative about his movements. The rise of the axe, the swing, the crack of splitting wood. Over and over, like a man trying to work something out of his system. He did not look broken to her, just tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that sleep could not fix. How was the work? Isaiah asked without looking up. He had known she was there all along. She hired me, Eliza said, stepping closer. For as much sewing as I can handle. Good. He set another log on the chopping block. That is good. Mrs. Murphy told me about the accident, Eliza said. She had not planned to bring it up, but the words came out anyway. About what happened 3 years ago. The axe paused mid-swing. Isaiah lowered it slowly, his back still to her. The muscles in his shoulders tensed beneath his worn shirt. Did she now? It was not a question. There was no anger in his voice, just a flat acceptance. She said you blamed yourself, Eliza continued gently. She said some folks think you are dangerous. Isaiah finally turned to face her. His gray eyes were guarded now, waiting for the judgment he clearly expected. And what do you think? He asked. Liza met his gaze without flinching. I think we all have ghosts. The question is whether we let them drive us. Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He stood there for a long moment, the axe hanging loose at his side, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he nodded once, slowly. I reckon that is true enough, he said. He turned back to the woodpile and set another log. Supper will be ready in an hour. He did not say anything more, and Eliza did not push. Some wounds needed time before they could be examined. She understood that better than most. Days passed, settling into a quiet rhythm that surprised them both. Eliza worked in town during the day, mending and sewing for Mrs. Murphy and the growing number of women who heard about her skill. She had always been good with a needle. Her mother had taught her that much before the consumption took her. It was honest work, and it gave Eliza purpose. She returned to the cabin each evening as the sun went down. Isaiah would have supper ready. Nothing fancy, stew or beans or salt pork with whatever vegetables he had stored for winter. But it was warm and filling, and they ate together at the small table like it was the most natural thing in the world. After supper, Eliza would mend Isaiah's shirts or sew new curtains for the windows while he repaired things around the property. He fixed the broken hinge on the door, patched a hole in the roof, built new shelves for the kitchen. Little by little, the cabin was coming back to life. They spoke more now, not about anything important at first, just small things. The weather, the horses Eliza had seen at the livery stable, the way the prairie looked different every day depending on the light. But slowly the conversations deepened. One evening, while Eliza stitched a tear in Isaiah's work shirt, she found herself telling him about Kansas. His name was Clayton Harper, she said. Her needle moved steadily through the fabric, but her voice was far away. I met him when I was 23. He was charming, handsome, said all the right thing. Isaiah listened without interrupting. He sat across from her, carving something out of a block of wood. His hands were never idle. I thought he loved me, Eliza continued. But what he loved was the idea of me, a tall woman he could try to make small, a wife he could shape into whatever he wanted. She paused, the old anger rising in her chest. He did not like that I had opinions, she said. Did not like that I spoke my mind. He wanted me to be quiet and agreeable, to shrink myself so he could feel bigger. What happened? Isaiah asked quietly. Eliza's jaw tightened. He got rough with me. Not at first. At first it was just words, cutting me down, making me feel worthless. But then the words were not enough. She set down her sewing and looked at Isaiah directly. The last time he hit me, I hit him back. Broke his nose with a cast iron pan. Then I packed my things and left before sunrise. Never looked back. A ghost of a smile crossed Isaiah's face. Good for you. Eliza smiled too, though there was no humor in it. My family thought I was crazy, walking away from a man with money and position. But I would rather be poor and free than rich and broken. You were right to leave, Isaiah said simply. There was no judgment in his voice. No pity either, just understanding. Another night, it was Isaiah's turn to share his ghosts. They sat by the fire, the autumn wind howling outside. Eliza was knitting a scarf from yarn Mrs. Murphy had given her. Isaiah stared into the flames, his face half in shadow. Her name was Sarah, he said suddenly. My wife. She had a laugh that could fill a room. Made even the hardest days feel lighter. Eliza's hands stilled on her knitting. Our daughter was called Rose, Isaiah continued. His voice was rough with old grief. She was 6 years old, had her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, followed me around like a little shadow. He fell silent, and Eliza waited. The accident was my fault, Isaiah said finally. We were coming back from town. I knew the road near Devil's Canyon was dangerous. Knew we should have waited for daylight, but I was tired and wanted to get home. His hands clenched in his lap. The wheel hit a rock. The wagon went over. Sarah and Rose were thrown clear, but they landed wrong. Sarah broke her neck, died before I could reach her. Rose lived long enough to ask me why it was dark. Then she was gone too. Isaiah's voice cracked on the last word. Eliza set aside her knitting and moved to sit beside him. She did not touch him, just sat close enough that he could feel her presence. I walked away from that canyon without a scratch, Isaiah said. Not one single mark on my body. And I have been trying to figure out ever since why God took them and left me. Maybe it was not your time, Eliza said softly. Maybe. Isaiah shook his head. Or maybe living with it is the punishment. He looked at her then, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. I stopped living after that, he said. Did not see the point. Just existed. Day after day, waiting for it to be over. And now, Eliza asked. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Now I am not so sure, he said. They sat together until the fire burned low, two broken souls sharing their ghosts. Neither of them slept much that night, but somehow the silence between them felt less lonely than before. The town noticed their arrangement soon enough. Whispers followed Eliza through the mercantile when she went for supplies. Eyes lingered on her at church. Some of her sewing work dried up as women decided they did not want to associate with someone of questionable virtue. But others came quietly, slipping into Mrs. Murphy's parlor with torn dresses and worn quilts. Women who did not care what the town said, or perhaps understood more than they let on about the need for kindness. One afternoon, Isaiah came into town to buy supplies. It was the first time he had been seen in Dustwater in months, and people stopped in their tracks to stare. He walked beside Eliza down the main street, matching his pace to hers. His jaw was set, his eyes straight ahead. But he did not flinch from the attention. At the mercantile, the owner's wife could not contain her curiosity. You staying at the boarding house now? She asked Eliza, her eyes sliding to Isaiah. No, Isaiah's voice cut through the woman's pretense. She is staying with me. The words fell heavy in the room. The owner's wife gasped. Another customer dropped a jar of preserves that shattered on the floor. Isaiah did not flinch. He finished gathering his supplies, paid for them without another word, and walked out with Eliza at his side. That night, Eliza worried she had caused him trouble. They sat at the table after supper, the remains of their meal between them. You should not have to face their judgment because of me, she said. I can find somewhere else to stay. Isaiah looked at her across the table. His gray eyes were steady, certain. I faced worse alone, he said. I do not mind facing this with you. The words settled deep in Eliza's chest, warming her more than any fire could. Sunday came cold and clear. Eliza dressed carefully in her best dress, the dark blue one with the white collar that made her feel almost pretty. When she emerged from behind the screen Isaiah had built for her privacy, she found him waiting in a clean suit. He looked different somehow. Younger. Less burdened. "You look nice," she said, surprised. A faint color rose in Isaiah's weathered cheeks. "So do you." They walked to church together, heads turned as they entered, whispers following them down the aisle. Isaiah offered his arm, and Eliza took it without hesitation. They sat in the back pew, close enough that their shoulders touched. The Reverend Murphy gave his sermon about forgiveness and second chances, though whether it was pointed at them or not, Eliza could not say. During the final hymn, Isaiah stood stiff and silent. Eliza could feel the tension radiating from him. She knew without asking that this was the first time he had been in this church since the accident, since the funeral for Sarah and Rose. She shifted closer, her shoulder pressing firmly against his. After a moment, Isaiah leaned into the contact. Just slightly, but it was enough. After the service, they left quickly. Outside in the cold sunshine, Isaiah let out a slow breath. "That was not easy," Eliza said. "No." Isaiah shook his head, but it was necessary. They walked home together, and something had shifted between them. Some wall that had been standing was beginning to crumble. That night, sitting by the fire, Isaiah spoke again. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "Winter is coming. There is no sense in rushing off to the double bar when the weather turns." Eliza met his eyes. "Thank you." Neither of them said what was growing between them, but both of them felt it, something quiet and steady, something that felt like the beginning of home. Later, as Eliza lay in her bed by the fire, she thought about how strange life could be. She had come west running from one man and found shelter with another. She had expected nothing but had found something she could not quite name. Isaiah Dune was broken. She knew that, but so was she. And maybe, just maybe, two broken people could help put each other back together. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, bringing the first hints of winter. But inside the cabin, everything was warm. Winter came hard and fast to Dustwater. Snow buried the prairie under a thick white blanket that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The temperature dropped so low that the water in the washing basin froze overnight. The wind howled across the empty land like a wounded animal. Eliza's sewing work slowed but never stopped completely. Women still came to Mrs. Murphy's parlor with their mending, grateful for her skill even if they would not speak to her in public. Life in the cabin deepened into something steady and sure. Isaiah built a proper bed frame for Eliza, so she no longer had to sleep on the bench. He moved it to a corner of the cabin and hung a curtain for her privacy. It was a simple thing, made of plain wood and covered with quilts, but Eliza looked at it and saw something else entirely. He was making room for her, not just in his home, but in his life. She responded in kind. She cooked fuller meals now, using the supplies from the root cellar Isaiah had stocked for winter. Stews thick with vegetables and salt pork, biscuits with fresh butter, pies made from preserved apples. They ate together every night. They talked about everything and nothing. They planned repairs for spring that might never come, and neither of them questioned why they were making plans together. Neither of them said the word marriage, but it lived in the space between them, growing stronger with every passing day. December brought the winter festival to Dustwater. It was a tradition that went back decades, Mrs. Murphy explained. A time for the whole town to come together and celebrate surviving another year. There would be music and dancing and food and fellowship. "Everyone comes," Mrs. Murphy said, her eyes twinkling. Even Isaiah Dune used to come. Before the accident, he was quite the dancer in his day. Eliza could not picture it. The quiet, careful man she knew, dancing in a crowded hall. But then again, Isaiah had been a different man before grief hollowed him out. "Will you come?" Mrs. Murphy asked. "You would be most welcome." Eliza said she would think about it, but she already knew she wanted to go. She had not danced in years, had not had occasion to. That night, she mentioned the festival to Isaiah. They were sitting by the fire, as they did every evening now. Isaiah was whittling a wooden figure, something that might be a bird or might be a flower. His hands were always busy. "Mrs. Murphy invited me to the winter festival," Eliza said. "She says the whole town will be there." Isaiah's hands stilled on his whittling. "The whole town. She said you used to go," Eliza continued. "Before, that was a long time ago." Eliza watched his face in the firelight. The shadows made him look older. more tired. I would like to go, she said, but not without you. Isaiah looked at her then. His gray eyes were unreadable. Why are you so? He asked. Because you have been hiding long enough, Eliza said gently, and because I would like to dance with you. Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes, a spark of something that might have been hope. I do not know if I can, he said. You can, Eliza replied. We can do it together. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, he said, for you. The night of the festival, Eliza dressed in her best dress again, the dark blue one that made her feel almost pretty. She pinned up her hair and even borrowed a bit of ribbon from Mrs. Murphy to tie around her neck. When she emerged from behind her curtain, Isaiah was waiting in a suit she had never seen before. It was black and well cut, if slightly old-fashioned. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked handsome, distinguished. He looked like a man coming back to life. You look beautiful, Isaiah said. His voice was rough, almost shy. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. So do you. They walked to the town hall together, their breath forming clouds in the cold night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Inside, the hall was warm and bright and full of people. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over everything. A band played in the corner, fiddles and guitars in a piano that had seen better days. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family in town. Heads turned as Isaiah and Eliza entered. Conversations paused, eyes widened. Isaiah Doone had not been to a town gathering in 3 years. And here he was with the tall, stranger woman everyone had been gossiping about. Eliza felt the weight of their stares, but Isaiah offered his arm, and she took it. Let them look, he murmured. I have nothing to be ashamed of. They found a spot near the edge of the room and watched the dancing. The music was lively, and couples whirled across the floor in colorful blurs. Children ran between the adults, laughing and playing. It was everything Eliza had imagined community could be. Everything she had never really had. Would you like to dance? Isaiah asked. Eliza smiled up at him. I thought you would never ask. He led her onto the floor, and they joined the other couples. Isaiah was a good dancer, better than Eliza had expected. He moved with easy grace, guiding her through the steps like he had been doing it all his life. Mrs. Murphy was right, Eliza said. You are quite the dancer. A ghost of a smile crossed Isaiah's face. I used to be. For a few precious minutes, everything was perfect. The music swelled around them. The world narrowed to just the two of them, moving together in perfect harmony. And then Clayton Harper walked through the door. Eliza saw him immediately. He was impossible to miss, standing too well dressed among the dust-worn people of Dustwater. His suit was expensive, his boots polished to a shine. He looked exactly the same as he had in Kansas. Handsome, charming, dangerous. Her feet stopped moving. Her hand tightened on Isaiah's shoulder. What is wrong? Isaiah asked, following her gaze. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. That is him. That is Clayton. Isaiah's body went rigid. His gray eyes turned to steel as he looked at the man who had hurt the woman he was holding. Clayton spotted her almost immediately. His face lit up with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He made his way across the room, pushing through the crowd without apology. Eliza, he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. There you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. Eliza's chin lifted. She would not cower. Not anymore. I left Kansas so you would not find me, Clayton, she said. Her voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Take the hint. Clayton's smile turned sharp. Now is that any way to talk to your intended? He looked around at the watching crowd, playing to his audience. This woman promised to marry me. Then she ran off in the middle of the night like a common thief. I was never going to marry you, Eliza said. I made that clear. You made nothing clear. Clayton stepped closer, his voice dropping to something ugly. You led me on for months, made promises you never intended to keep, and then you attacked me and disappeared. I defended myself, Eliza said, after you hit me. The crowd gasped, but Clayton just laughed. She is lying, he said. Look at her. A woman that size could break a man in half. She is the one who was violent. She is the one who ran because she knew what she had done was wrong. The old shame tried to rise in Eliza's chest. The old voices that said she was too much, too tall, too stubborn, too difficult. But then she felt Isaiah's hand on her arm. Steady, strong. She is not lying, Isaiah said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade. And if you hit her, then you are less than a man. Clayton's face twisted with rage. Who are you to talk to me like that? Some backwater nobody living in the dirt? I am the man who will break your jaw if you do not leave right now. Clayton laughed again, but there was less certainty in it now. He looked at Isaiah, taking in his size, his weathered face, the dangerous stillness in his eyes. You can have her, Clayton said with a sneer. She is more trouble than she is worth anyway. But this is not over, he pointed at Eliza. You owe me for what you did. She does not owe you anything, Isaiah said. Clayton opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was going to say was lost as Isaiah's fist connected with his face. The crack of bone was loud in the sudden silence. Clayton went down hard, blood spurting from his nose, and stayed down. The room froze. People stared in shock. No one moved. But then something unexpected happened. A woman stepped forward. Mrs. Henderson, one of the ladies Eliza had sewn for. She looked down at Clayton with contempt. That man grabbed my arm at the mercantile this afternoon, she said, when I would not tell him where to find Miss Monroe. He is the one who should leave. Another woman spoke up. He offered my husband money to tell him where she was staying. When Robert refused, he threatened him. More voices joined in, men who had seen Clayton throwing his weight around town. Women who had been uncomfortable with his too smooth smile. People who had watched Isaiah Doone crawl out of his grief and start living again. You need to leave, the sheriff said, stepping forward. He was an older man with a silver mustache and hard eyes. We do not take kindly to outsiders who threaten our people. Clayton struggled to his feet, still clutching his bleeding nose. His expensive suit was ruined. His pride was in tatters. This is not over, he snarled at Eliza. But even he could see he was beaten. He backed toward the door, surrounded by hostile faces, and disappeared into the night. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then the band started playing again, tentatively at first, then stronger. People began to move, to talk, to return to their celebrating. And just like that, Dustwater had chosen a side. Several people approached Eliza and Isaiah over the next hour. Some offered words of support, others simply nodded in acknowledgement. It was not friendship exactly, but it was acceptance. And that was more than Eliza had expected. They left the festival early, walking home through the cold night. Neither of them spoke until they were inside the cabin, the door closed against the world. You did not have to do that, Eliza said. She was still shaking, though whether from cold or relief or something else, she could not say. Isaiah turned to look at her. His gray eyes were soft now, the steel gone. Yes, I did, he said. He has money, Eliza said. Power. He will not just give up. I know. Isaiah moved closer, close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Eliza waited. I have fallen in love with you. Isaiah spoke the words like they hurt him, like they were being pulled from somewhere deep and wounded. I know I am broken. I know I have nothing to offer. But I love you, and I do not want to lose you. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Not sad tears, something else entirely. Then do not, she said. And when Isaiah kissed her, standing in the warm light of their cabin, while the winter wind howled outside, it felt like coming home. Clayton Harper did not leave Dustwater. He checked into the only hotel in town and made himself at home. Every day he walked the streets in his expensive suits, smiling that charming smile at anyone who would meet his eyes. He told anyone who would listen that he was there to rescue a woman who had been manipulated by a dangerous hermit. Most people did not believe him, but some did. Whispers began to spread through town. Had Isaiah Doone really been responsible for that wagon accident 3 years ago? Had the whole thing been covered up? Was Eliza Monroe safe with a man like that? Clayton knew exactly what he was doing. He could not win by force, so he would win by poison. Drip by drip, he would turn the town against Isaiah and Eliza. And then, when she had nowhere else to go, she would come back to him. Eliza heard the whispers everywhere she went, at the mercantile, at church, even at Mrs. Murphy's, where she had thought she was safe. He is spreading lies, Eliza said one evening. pacing the small cabin like a caged animal, saying you are dangerous, saying you did something wrong. Isaiah sat at the table watching her. His face was calm, but his eyes were troubled. People talk, he said. They always have. But this is different. Eliza stopped pacing and faced him. He is trying to destroy you, to get to me. I know, we should leave. Pack up and go somewhere he cannot find us. Isaiah shook his head slowly. Running did not work for you before. It will not work now. Men like Clayton Harper do not give up. They follow. Then what do we do? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to where Eliza was standing. We stand our ground, he said. We face him, and we trust that the truth matters more than lies. Eliza wanted to believe him, but she had seen what Clayton was capable of, how he could twist words and facts and people to get what he wanted. That night, she lay awake for hours, listening to the wind and worrying about the future. The next blow came 2 days later. A man in a fancy suit arrived from the state capitol, carrying papers and asking questions about Isaiah's property. He said he represented the railroad, and they were interested in purchasing land for a new line. Isaiah had never heard of any railroad plans in this area. Neither had anyone else in town. But the man kept asking questions about the boundaries of Isaiah's property, about the title to his land, about whether all his taxes were paid up. Finally, Isaiah had enough. Who sent you? He demanded. The railroad man smiled. Just doing my job, Mr. Doone. But Isaiah saw the way the man's eyes shifted, the way he avoided certain questions. And he knew. Clayton Harper, he said. The railroad man's smile faltered. You tell your boss, Isaiah said, his voice low and dangerous, that this land belonged to my father and his father before him. Every tax has been paid. Every paper is in order. And if he thinks he can scare me off with threats and lawyers, he does not know who he is dealing with. The railroad man left quickly after that. But more trouble followed. A week later, a fire started in the barn behind Isaiah's property. Just a small one. Not enough to spread to the cabin, but enough to destroy the winter feed for his mule and the tools he needed for spring planting. Isaiah put out the fire before it could do more damage. But when he searched the area around the barn, he found something. Footprints. Fresh ones, leading away toward town. Someone had set the fire deliberately. Eliza was terrified. This is getting worse, she said. He is going to hurt you, maybe kill you. He is trying to scare us, Isaiah said. He was angry now, a cold, quiet anger that frightened Eliza more than shouting would have. He wants us to run, to give up, to let him win. Maybe we should. Eliza's voice broke. I am not worth all this trouble. Isaiah turned to her then. His gray eyes were fierce. You are worth everything, he said. Do not ever say that again. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. We will get through this, he murmured against her hair. Together. But even as he said it, Eliza wondered if it was true. The turning point came on a Sunday morning. Eliza was walking to church alone. Isaiah had stayed behind to repair the damage to the barn. She was thinking about the sermon she might hear, about the cold wind cutting through her cloak, about nothing in particular. She did not see Clayton until he stepped out of an alley directly into her path. Hello, Eliza, he said. That charming smile was in place, but his eyes were cold as ice. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. Get out of my way. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Clayton stepped closer. I have been patient. I have given you time to come to your senses, but my patience is wearing thin. I am not going anywhere with you, Eliza said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. Not now, not ever. Clayton's smile disappeared. You do not have a choice. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You are coming with me, he said, one way or another. Eliza tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. She opened her mouth to scream, but Clayton's other hand clamped over her face. Do not even think about it, he hissed. For a terrible moment, Eliza thought this was it. Clayton would drag her away, and no one would stop him, and everything she had built would be destroyed. But then a voice cut through the morning air. Let her go. Clayton's head whipped around. Mrs. Henderson stood at the entrance to the alley, her face white with shock but her voice firm. Let her go right now, Mrs. Henderson repeated, or I will scream loud enough to wake the dead. Clayton's grip loosened. He looked between the two women, calculating his options. "This is not your concern," he said to Mrs. Henderson. "She is my friend. That makes it my concern." More people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Men and women Eliza had sewn for, neighbors who had watched her and Isaiah attend church together, even the sheriff who happened to be walking past on his way to the service. "There a problem here?" the sheriff asked, his hand resting on his gun. Clayton released Eliza's arm. She stumbled back, breathing hard. "No problem," Clayton said. "Just a misunderstanding." "Did not look like a misunderstanding to me," the sheriff said. "Looked like you were trying to force this woman somewhere she did not want to go." Clayton's charm flickered back into place. A lover's quarrel. Nothing more. "Miss Monroe," the sheriff said, ignoring Clayton entirely. "Were you going somewhere with this man willingly?" Eliza shook her head. "No, I was not." "Then I think you had better leave town, Mr. Harper." The sheriff's voice was mild, but his eyes were hard. "Before something happens that you regret." Clayton looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him. For once, his charm had failed. His money meant nothing. His threats were empty. "This is not over," he said to Eliza. But even he did not sound like he believed it anymore. He turned and walked away, and this time no one stopped him from leaving. That afternoon, papers were signed at the sheriff's office. Clayton Harper was officially warned to stay away from Eliza Monroe. Any further contact would result in his arrest. The railroad man disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived. The questions about Isaiah's property stopped. The whispers faded. Dustwater had closed ranks around its own. Eliza cried when she heard the news. Relief and gratitude and something else she could not name flooding through her. "They protected me," she said to Isaiah that evening. "People who barely know me stood up for me." Isaiah nodded. He did not seem surprised. "You are part of this community now," he said. "Whether you meant to be or not, they look after their own." Eliza thought about all the small kindnesses she had received, the sewing work, the nods of acknowledgement, the way Mrs. Murphy always had tea ready when she arrived, the way the sheriff tipped his hat to her in the street. She had been so focused on not belonging that she had missed the moments when she started to. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "Not just until spring, not just until I figure out what to do next. I want to stay here, with you." Isaiah's eyes softened. He reached out and took her hand. "I was hoping you would say that," he said. They sat together as the sun went down, their fingers intertwined. Outside, the winter world was cold and white and empty, but inside the cabin, everything was warm. Clayton Harper left Dustwater the next morning. Eliza watched from the window of Mrs. Murphy's parlor as his fancy carriage rolled down the main street and disappeared into the white prairie. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel anything at all, really. Just a quiet relief that settled over her like a warm blanket. It was over. For the first time since she had run from Kansas, Eliza felt truly free. That night, Isaiah asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the fire, as they always did. Eliza was knitting a scarf, her needles clicking softly in the quiet. Isaiah was whittling again, though she still could not tell what he was making. "Eliza," he said. She looked up at the sound of her name. Something in his voice made her set down her knitting. Isaiah set aside his whittling and turned to face her. His gray eyes were serious, but there was a warmth in them she had never seen before. "I am not a young man," he said. "I have made mistakes. I have lost more than most people could bear. I do not have much to offer except this cabin and this land and whatever years I have left." Isaiah. Eliza's heart was beating so hard she could barely breathe. "But I love you," Isaiah continued, "more than I ever thought I could love anyone again. And I want to spend every day I have left trying to make you happy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a thin band of gold with a small blue stone that caught the firelight. "This was my mother's," he said. "It is not fancy, but I would be honored if you would wear it. If you would be my wife." Eliza stared at the ring. Tears were streaming down her face, though she had not realized she was crying. "Yes," she whispered. Isaiah's face transformed. The heaviness that had lived in his eyes for so long seemed to lift, replaced by something bright and fierce and hopeful. "Yes," he repeated like he could not quite believe it. Eliza laughed through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Isaiah slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, and everything else fell away. The wedding was planned for Christmas Day. It seemed fitting somehow. A new beginning on a day of new beginnings, a celebration of hope in the darkest part of winter. News spread through Dustwater quickly, as news always did in small towns. Some people were surprised. Others said they had seen it coming for weeks. But almost everyone seemed pleased. Isaiah Dune had lived like a ghost for 3 years. Now he was coming back to life, and the tall seamstress from Kansas had given him a reason to. Eliza threw herself into preparations with an energy she had not felt in years. She made her own wedding dress, working late into the nights by lamplight. Simple white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing fancy, but beautiful in its simplicity. Mrs. Murphy helped with the food. Other women from the church contributed dishes for the reception. The whole town seemed to want to be part of the celebration. Even people who had looked down their noses at Eliza before now smiled at her in the street. Amazing what a little acceptance could do. The morning of December 25th dawned cold and clear. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the world in a blanket of white. The sun rose bright and golden, turning the prairie into a glittering wonderland. Eliza dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons on her gown. She looked at herself in the small mirror Isaiah had hung for her and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, truly happy, for maybe the first time in her life. A knock at the cabin door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Murphy standing on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool coat and carrying a small bundle. "Every bride needs something borrowed," Mrs. Murphy said. She held out the bundle. "This was mine, many years ago. I would be honored if you would wear it." Eliza unwrapped the fabric to reveal a delicate lace veil, yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful. "I cannot accept this," Eliza said, touched beyond words. "You can and you will." Mrs. Murphy's eyes were bright with tears. "You deserve every happiness, my dear. Now come. Your husband is waiting." The church was full when they arrived. Every pew was packed with townspeople who had come to witness the wedding. Candles flickered in every window, casting a warm golden glow over the congregation. Someone had decorated the altar with pine boughs and winter berries. Eliza paused at the entrance, her heart pounding. And then she saw Isaiah. He stood at the altar in his black suit, his silver-streaked hair combed neatly, his gray eyes fixed on her. When he saw her in her white dress with the lace veil, his face transformed. He looked at her like she was the sun coming up after a long, dark night. Eliza walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. But she did not feel alone. Every person in this church had become her family in one way or another. When she reached the altar, Isaiah took her hands in his. His fingers were warm and steady. "You are beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," she whispered back. Reverend Murphy smiled and began the ceremony. The vows were simple, traditional, the same words that had been spoken in churches across the country for generations. But when Eliza said "I do," she meant it with every fiber of her being. And when Isaiah said it back, his voice was thick with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Murphy said. "You may kiss your bride." Isaiah kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, husband and wife, two broken people who had found healing in each other. Outside, the world was white and cold and beautiful. Someone threw rice that scattered like snow on the ground. Children laughed and ran circles around them. The whole town seemed to be celebrating. The reception was held in the church hall. Food covered every available surface. The band that had played at the winter festival set up in the corner and played joyful music that made people tap their feet. Isaiah and Eliza danced their first dance as husband and wife. He held her close, moving her across the floor with that easy grace that still surprised her. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Isaiah murmured against her hair. "I never thought I would want to." "Neither did I," Eliza replied. "But here we are. Here we are." They danced until their feet ached. They ate until they could eat no more. They accepted congratulations and well wishes from everyone in town, even from people who had once looked at them with suspicion and scorn. By the time they walked home through the snow, the stars were out and the moon was full. Isaiah carried Eliza over the threshold of their cabin, laughing as he nearly tripped on the step. She laughed too, holding tight to his neck. "Welcome home, Mrs. Doone," he said. Eliza looked around the cabin. Their cabin. It still had its empty spaces, its shadows of grief, but it was different now. Warmer, fuller. It was home. That night, lying in Isaiah's arms, Eliza allowed herself to believe that everything would be all right. The past was behind them. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility. She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, steady and strong. Outside, the winter wind howled across the prairie, but inside the cabin, everything was warm. January came with a vengeance. The blizzard that swept across the prairie was unlike anything Dustwater had seen in years. Snow fell for 3 days straight, piling up in drifts higher than a man's head. The wind screamed through every crack and crevice, turning the world into a white blur of ice and fury. Isaiah and Eliza huddled in their cabin, feeding the fire and waiting for the storm to pass. They had plenty of food and wood. They had each other. They would be fine. But on the fourth day, Isaiah collapsed. Eliza found him on the floor by the woodpile, burning with fever and barely able to breathe. She managed to get him to the bed with strength she did not know she had. His skin was hot to the touch, his breath coming in short, rattling gasps. "Isaiah!" Eliza's voice shook. "Isaiah, wake up! Talk to me!" But he did not respond. His eyes were closed, his face gray beneath the flush of fever. Eliza knew she should get the doctor, but the blizzard still raged outside, making travel impossible. Even if she could reach town, she might not be able to get back. She was on her own. The next 8 days were the longest of Eliza's life. She did not sleep, could not sleep. Every moment was consumed with caring for the man she loved. She cooled his fever with cloths dipped in snowmelt. She forced water between his cracked lips. She changed his sweat-soaked sheets and piled blankets on him when he shivered and stripped them off when he burned. She talked to him constantly, not knowing if he could hear her. "You have to fight," she said, gripping at him. "You have to stay with me. I did not come all this way just to lose you now." She told him about Kansas, about her mother who had died when Eliza was just a girl, about her dreams of a better life, a place where she could belong. She told him about the first time she saw him in that dusty eatery, how something in his eyes had made her trust him when she had no reason to trust anyone. She told him she loved him. Over and over. "Say a prayer. You are needed here," she whispered. "You are loved. You have to stay." The fever climbed higher. On the fifth night, Isaiah began to thrash and cry out in his delirium. He called for Sarah. He called for Rose. He begged someone unseen to forgive him. Eliza held him down and wept. "I am here," she said. "I am here. You are safe." But she was not sure he heard her. On the seventh day, the blizzard finally broke. The sky cleared and the sun came out, turning the snow into a field of glittering diamonds. Eliza bundled up and fought her way to town to fetch the doctor. Dr. Morrison was a gruff man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Isaiah carefully, checking his temperature, listening to his lungs, studying the flush of fever on his cheeks. "Pneumonia," he said finally. "Bad case. I'm surprised he has lasted this long." Eliza felt her blood turn to ice. "Will he live?" Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "That depends," he said, "on whether he has something worth living for." He left her with medicine and instructions and a warning. The next 24 hours would be critical. If the fever broke, Isaiah might survive. If it did not, well, Eliza did not let him finish that sentence. That night was the worst. Isaiah's fever spiked higher than ever. His breathing grew labored, each breath a struggle. His skin was gray as ashes, his eyes sunken. He was dying. Eliza could see it, feel it. She climbed into the bed beside him and pulled him close. His body burned against hers like a furnace. "You listen to me, Isaiah Doone," she said. Her voice was fierce, even as tears streamed down her face. "You do not get to leave me. Not now, not after everything we have been through." She pressed her lips to his forehead. "You fought your way out of that canyon 3 years ago," she said. "You fought through the grief and the guilt and the loneliness. You can fight this too." Isaiah did not respond. His breathing was shallow, barely there. "I need you," Eliza whispered. Do you hear me? I need you. So fight. Fight for me. Fight for us. She held him through the long, dark hours of the night. She did not sleep, did not pray, just held on and refused to let go. And sometime near dawn, something changed. Isaiah's breathing eased. His skin cooled slightly. The terrible gray pallor began to fade. The fever had broken. Eliza sobbed with relief, clutching him tight enough to bruise. When Isaiah opened his eyes hours later, weak and confused but alive, the first thing he saw was her face. "You would not let me go," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. Eliza smiled through her tears. Never. The recovery was slow. For days, Isaiah could barely lift his head. Eliza fed him broth and forced him to drink water and bullied him into taking his medicine. Gradually, his strength returned. Color came back to his cheeks. His eyes lost that frightening cloudiness. A week after the fever broke, he was able to sit up in bed. 2 weeks later, he could walk to the table for meals. 3 weeks later, he was insisting on helping with chores again, despite Eliza's protests. "You almost died," she said. "You need to rest." "I have rested enough," Isaiah replied, "and I am tired of watching you do all the work." He was stubborn, but then again, so was she. They compromised. He would help with light tasks, but leave the heavy work to her until he was fully recovered. One evening, as they sat by the fire together for the first time since his illness, Isaiah took her hand. "I saw them," he said, quietly. "Sarah and Rose, while I was sick." Eliza's heart clenched. "I thought they were coming to take me with them," Isaiah continued. "I was ready to go. I wanted to go." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "But then I heard your voice," Isaiah said, "telling me to fight, telling me you needed me. And I realized something." "What?" Isaiah looked at her, his gray eyes clear and bright. "They are at peace," he said. "They have been at peace for a long time. The only one who was not at peace was me. I was holding on to the guilt, the grief, because I thought I owed them that. But I do not. They would want me to live, to be happy." He squeezed her hand. "You gave me a reason to live again, Eliza. When you came into that eatery lost and alone, I saw something in you that I recognize. Something broken, but something strong too. I wanted to help you, and helping you helped me." Eliza brought his hand to her lips and kissed it. "We saved each other," she said. Isaiah nodded. "We saved each other." Outside, the winter wind had finally calmed. The world was still white with snow, but the cold had lost its bite. Inside the cabin, everything was warm. Spring came late to Dustwater that year. The snows lingered well into March, reluctant to release their grip on the prairie. But finally, slowly, the white gave way to green. The ice melted from the creek behind the cabin. The first wildflowers pushed their way through the thawing earth. And Eliza and Isaiah began to build. The cabin needed expanding. It had been meant for one person, maybe two, in close quarters. But now it was a home, a real home, and homes needed room to grow. Isaiah drew up plans at the kitchen table, sketching with a carpenter's precision. A proper bedroom with a door that closed, a larger kitchen with better storage, and beside the cabin, a small separate building that would serve as Eliza's sewing shop. "It is too much," Eliza said, looking at the plans. "We do not have the money." "We have hands," Isaiah replied, "and time, and neighbors who owe us favors." He smiled, and Eliza felt her heart swell with love for this man who had been so broken and was now putting himself back together. The work began in April. Men from town came to help, some because they felt they owed Isaiah for his years of quiet service before the accident, others because they had come to respect Eliza and wanted to be part of something good. Even the Reverend showed up one morning, his sleeves rolled up and his face determined. "The Lord loves those who build," he said. "Let me help." Eliza cooked for the workers, massive pots of stew and mountains of biscuits. She learned to make coffee strong enough to strip paint the way the men liked it. She laughed at their jokes and thanked them for their labor and marveled at how quickly walls could rise when people worked together. By the end of May, the additions were complete. The new bedroom was beautiful, simple but spacious, with a window that faced east to catch the morning sun. Isaiah had carved the bed frame himself, each post smoothed and shaped with care. The kitchen was a dream. New shelves lined the walls, a larger stove sat in the corner, And there was finally enough room to move without bumping into everything. But it was the sewing shop that made Eliza cry. Isaiah led her there one evening as the sun was setting. He had kept her away during the final days of construction, saying he wanted to surprise her. "Close your eyes," he said. Eliza closed them. She felt Isaiah guide her forward, heard a door open, felt the warmth of enclosed space around her. "Wow. Now look," he said. She opened her eyes and gasped. The shop was small but perfect. A large window let in plenty of light for detailed work. Shelves lined the walls, waiting for fabric and thread. A beautiful wooden counter stood near the door, ready to receive customers. And on the door, freshly painted, was a sign: Eliza's Fine Sewing. "Isaiah," she breathed. He stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You needed a proper place," he said. "Not just a corner of someone else's parlor. A place of your own." Eliza turned and threw her arms around him. "I love you," she said into his chest. "I love you so much." "I know," Isaiah replied. "I love you too." Word spread quickly that the tall seamstress from Kansas now had her own shop. Women came from Dustwater and beyond, bringing their mending and their orders and their requests. Eliza worked happily through the summer. Wedding dresses and Sunday suits and children's clothes and quilts. Her hands never stopped moving, and the coins in her tin box grew steadily. But more than the money, she treasured the connections. Women who lingered after their fittings to chat, mothers who brought their daughters to learn a few basic stitches, old friends from those first difficult weeks who had become true friends now. She belonged here. Finally, truly belonged. Summer faded into autumn. The prairie turned gold and amber and red. The air grew crisp with the promise of another hard winter. But this year, Eliza and Isaiah were ready. The woodpile was stacked high. The root cellar was full. The new bedroom was warm and snug. They had everything they needed. One evening in late September, a knock came at the cabin door. Isaiah opened it to find a young couple standing on the porch. They were barely more than children, really. A boy and a girl with scared eyes and thin clothes, and nothing but a single bag between them. "Please," the boy said, "we just need somewhere to stay for the night. We have been walking for days." Isaiah looked at them for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "We have room." The couple's story was not unusual. They had run away from families who disapproved of their match. They had nowhere to go, no money, no plan, just each other and hope. Eliza fed them stew and bread. Isaiah gave them blankets and pointed them to the bench by the fire. "You can stay as long as you need," Isaiah said. The boy stared at him in disbelief. "You do not even know us." "I know what it is like to need kindness," Isaiah replied. "To be alone and afraid and have someone offer help without asking anything in return." He glanced at Eliza, and she knew he was thinking of that night in the eatery when he had offered her a place to sleep. "So stay," Isaiah said. "Figure out what comes next. We will help however we can." The young couple stayed for 2 weeks. Isaiah helped the boy find work at a ranch outside town. Eliza taught the girl to sew well enough to earn her own money. By the time they left, they had enough saved for a small place of their own. "Thank you," the girl said, hugging Eliza tightly. "For everything." "Pay it forward," Eliza replied. "Help someone else when you can. That is all we ask." They were not the last. Over the next year, other travelers came to the cabin at the edge of Dustwater. Families in need of a meal, wanderers looking for direction, people who had heard somewhere along the road that there was a tall woman and her quiet husband who helped those who needed it. Isaiah and Eliza turned no one away. What started as kindness became purpose. The empty spaces in their home, in their hearts, began to fill with something new. Not replacing what was lost, but building something different, something good. And through it all, Eliza watched Isaiah transform. The man who had been walking dead for 3 years was now fully alive. He smiled more, laughed more. The haunted look had faded from his gray eyes, replaced by something warm and hopeful. He would never forget Sarah and Rose. They would always be part of him, but he was no longer trapped by their memory. He had learned to honor them by living, not by dying slowly. One evening, as another golden sunset painted the prairie, Eliza stood on the porch of their cabin and watched Isaiah walk back from the barn. He moved differently now, lighter, like the weight he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. He saw her watching and smiled. That smile she had come to love so much. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, climbing the steps to join her. Eliza leaned into him as his arm wrapped around her waist. "I am thinking about how strange life is," she said. "I came here running from one thing and found something else entirely. I expected nothing, and I found everything." Isaiah pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "So did I," he said. They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear. Behind them, their home glowed with lamplight and warmth. This is what it means to be happy, Eliza thought. This is what it means to be home. 2 years had passed since Eliza Monroe missed that stagecoach in Dustwater. 2 years of building and growing and healing. 2 years of love that had started as kindness and become something unshakable. The cabin at the edge of town was no longer small. It had grown into a proper homestead, with the original structure now attached to new rooms and porches and the sewing shop that Eliza ran with pride. Her name was known throughout the region now. Eliza Doone, the pure seamstress who could make a wedding dress fit for a queen or mend a pair of work trousers to last another decade. Women traveled miles to visit her shop. Her reputation spread by word of mouth, one satisfied customer at a time. But it was not the success of her business that filled Eliza's heart. It was the life she had built, the home she had made, the man she had saved and been saved by in return. Isaiah had changed so much from the broken ghost she had first met in that eatery. He smiled easily now, laughed at jokes, talked to neighbors without that wall of grief between him and the world. He still visited the graves of Sarah and Rose, still laid flowers there on their birthdays and the anniversary of the accident. But he no longer went to mourn. He went to remember, to honor. And then he came home to Eliza and the life they were building together. The people of Dustwater had changed too. The town that had once looked at Eliza with suspicion now embraced her as one of their own. She served on church committees. She helped organize the Winter Festival. She was the first person women called when they needed advice or comfort or just someone to listen. And Isaiah, who had been an outcast for 3 years, was now respected. People asked his opinion at town meetings. Men sought his help with building projects. He had rejoined the community he had once retreated from. They were home. One afternoon in early summer, a stranger rode into Dustwater. Eliza was in her shop, fitting a young bride for her wedding dress, when she saw him through the window. A well-dressed man on a fine horse, looking around with an expression she could not quite read. Something about him seemed familiar. "Who is that?" the bride asked, following Eliza's gaze. "I do not know," Eliza replied, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. The stranger found her shop before the hour was out. He tied his horse outside and entered with a tip of his hat. Up close, Eliza could see he was younger than she had thought, maybe 30, with features that reminded her of someone, though she could not place who. "Mrs. Doone?" he asked. "Yes, how can I help you?" "My name is Daniel Harper." The man removed his hat. "I am Clayton Harper's brother." Eliza felt her blood turn to ice. She had not heard that name in 2 years, had almost convinced herself that chapter of her life was truly over. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. Daniel Harper raised his hands. "Peace. I come in peace." He looked nothing like Clayton, Eliza realized. His eyes were warm where Clayton's had been cold. His manner was humble where Clayton's had been arrogant. "My brother passed away 6 months ago," Daniel said. "A riding accident. He fell from his horse and broke his neck." Liza did not know what to feel. Relief, guilt for feeling relieved, satisfaction that could not be satisfaction because she was not that kind of person. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said finally. It was the polite thing to say. Daniel shook his head. "I am not here for sympathy. Clayton was not a good man. I knew that even when we were boys. He hurt a lot of people, including you." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Before he died, Clayton kept a journal. I found it when I was settling his affairs. He wrote about you, about what he did, about how he tried to destroy you and the man you married." Daniel held out the envelope. "I cannot undo what my brother did," he said, "but I can apologize for it, and I can give you this." Eliza took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of bills, more money than she had ever seen in one place. "Consider it compensation," Daniel said, "for everything Clayton put you through, for the harassment, the threats, the fear." Eliza stared at the money. She did not want it. It felt wrong somehow, like accepting it would tie her to Clayton forever. I cannot take this, she said. Please. Daniel's voice was earnest. Let it do some good. Build something. Help people. Turn my brother's cruelty into kindness. That is the only way I know to make it right. Eliza looked at the money for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. He seemed genuine. Nothing like the brother who had tormented her. Just a man trying to make amends for sins he did not commit. All right, she said finally. I will take it, but not for myself. Daniel nodded. Whatever you think is best. He left that afternoon riding back the way he had come. Eliza never saw him again. But the money he brought changed everything. Eliza and Isaiah used it to build a small boarding house on the edge of their property, a place for travelers and those in need to stay without charge, a refuge for people who had nowhere else to go. They called it Second Chances Inn. Over the years that followed, dozens of people passed through its doors, families fleeing hard times, young couples starting over, wanderers looking for a place to rest. Isaiah and Eliza helped them all, fed them, sheltered them, gave them hope. And every time someone asked why they did it, Eliza told the same story. Because someone helped me once, she said. When I was lost and alone and had nowhere to go, a stranger offered me kindness without asking anything in return. And it changed my life. She would look at Isaiah then, her eyes bright with love. So we pay it forward, she said, every chance we get. 10 years had passed since Eliza Monroe missed that stagecoach and found her destiny. The prairie had not changed. It still stretched to the horizon in every direction, gold in summer and white in winter, endless and eternal under the vast western sky. But Dustwater had grown. New buildings lined the main street. More families had come to put down roots. The little town at the edge of nowhere was becoming something more. And at the center of it all, somehow, was the cabin that was no longer a cabin. The Dune homestead sprawled across several acres now. The original structure had been expanded so many times it was hard to tell where it ended and the additions began. Second Chances Inn stood nearby, always full of travelers grateful for a warm bed, and Eliza's fine sewing had become an institution. Women traveled from 3 counties away to buy dresses from the tall seamstress who had magic in her fingers. Young girls came to apprentice under her guidance. The shop that Isaiah had built with his own hands now employed 3 assistants and still could not keep up with demand. But on this particular evening, Eliza was not working. She stood on the porch of her home, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, more beautiful than any fabric she had ever seen. Isaiah came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. His hair was more silver than dark now, and lines creased his weathered face. But his eyes were the same gray she had fallen in love with all those years ago. What are you thinking about? He asked. The same question he had asked her 1,000 times over the years. Everything, Eliza replied. Nothing. How lucky we are. Isaiah rested his chin on top of her head. We made our own luck. That was true, Eliza knew. Nothing had been handed to them. Everything they had built together, through storms and sickness and doubt and fear. Through Clayton's cruelty and the town's suspicion, and all the small indignities of a world that did not know what to do with a woman who was too tall and a man who was too broken. They had survived it all, and they had thrived. A wagon was approaching on the road from town. Eliza watched it come, squinting against the setting sun. As it drew closer, she could see it was packed with belongings. A family from the looks of it. A man and woman and what appeared to be 3 children crowded among their possessions. The wagon stopped at the end of the drive. The man climbed down and approached the porch, hat in hand. Excuse me, he said. His voice was tired, his clothes dusty from the road. We heard there was a place here for folks who need a fresh start. Is that true? Eliza looked at Isaiah. He looked back at her. They both smiled. It is true, Isaiah said. Come on in. You look like you could use a hot meal. The family's eyes lit up with hope. The same hope that Eliza had felt all those years ago when a quiet stranger had offered her a place to sleep. Thank you, the man said. His voice was thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Eliza watched them unload their wagon and shepherd their children toward the inn. The smallest child, a girl of about 4, turned back to wave at her. Eliza waved back. Where did you come from? The little girl asked. That is a long story, Eliza said. I will tell you tomorrow. The family disappeared inside the inn, their voices fading into the evening. Isaiah and Eliza remained on the porch, watching the sun finish its descent. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? Isaiah asked quietly. If you had made that stagecoach, if you had gone to the double bar like you planned. Eliza considered the question. She had thought about it sometimes, in the early years, the life she might have had, the person she might have become. But those thoughts came less often now. No, she said, I do not wonder anymore. Isaiah nodded, neither do I. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. The same stars Eliza had seen on her first night in Dustwater, scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. A stranger paused at the edge of their property, a traveler from the pack on his back. Excuse me, the stranger called. Could you tell me where I am? Eliza felt Isaiah's arm tighten around her. Where do you want to be? She called back. The stranger laughed. Somewhere I can rest, somewhere that feels like home. Eliza smiled. Then you have come to the right place, she said. Come in. We will take care of you. The stranger walked up the path, and Eliza stepped forward to greet him. Behind her, Isaiah watched with quiet pride. This was their life now. Opening doors for others the way doors had been opened for them. Offering kindness without expectation. Building something good in a world that could be so hard. When the stranger was settled and the night had fully fallen, Eliza and Isaiah finally went inside. Their home was warm and bright. The fire crackled in the hearth that Isaiah had built with his own hands. The quilt Eliza had sewn draped over the chair, where Sarah's rocking chair used to sit unused. Everything had changed, and everything was exactly as it should be. Eliza looked around at the life they had created, the love they had found, the home they had built from nothing but kindness and hope. Right here, she thought, this is where I belong. Isaiah took her hand. Right here, he said, as if reading her mind. Eliza leaned into him and smiled. Right here, she agreed. And in those two words lived everything they had survived, everything they had chosen, and everything they had built. Together, forever, home.